Hi Year 10, this lesson will cover the English language focus for the structure question, which is question number 3 on paper 1. It's an 8-mark question and there's about 3 attempts in this lesson for you to really secure the language that the examiner needs, the length that the examiner needs, and how not to veer into a language question, which is what students tend to do. So, on here we've got our heading dealing with structure, and it's something that a lot of students nationally don't do very well, and that's just because you're so good at the question 2, the what, how, why, looking at the language and wanting to do that. So you'll see my sign on here, it says no language allowed, and that means language techniques. That means hyperbole, metaphor, personification. We're not interested in the nuts and bolts of the beautiful language. What we're interested in is the structural devices that the writer has used to pull you through the text, to keep you engaged and interested, and not just on the idea that you want to read on, because all fiction makes you want to read on. That's its purpose, its primary focus, but there'll be real specifics as to why, and I'll show you that. So you'll have to answer one 8-mark question on the fiction texts. It's usually, obviously in this paper we only have one source, and it's an extract from a short story a lot of the time, from the 30s or the 50s, things like that have been coming up. So not a necessarily modern text that you would be reading at home. So you can have a look at the short story anthology that AQA provide, or any of the exemplar sample papers, to show you what sort of material you're going to be covering. So yeah, like I said, this question is worth 8 marks. It's question 3 on the paper, and you should spend around 10 to 12 minutes on this question, very much like the question before it, number 2. In response to this question, like I've said, I've given you a warning about language devices and these techniques. Do not ever write that it makes you want to read on, or that it creates tension, unless you then relate it to the content of the text. So for example, if there is an avalanche coming in the text, yes, you want to read on, but that is specifically because you want to see whether the main character survives, whether she interprets the noise as some sort of foreshadowing of a difficult event. Okay. So this would be our normal slide. I've put this up in class a few times for our do now. So I'm just going to run through the answers with you. The title is Can I Ace AO2 Structure? AO2 covers language, structure and form, and we're going to focus on the structural aspects of what that assessment objective requires. And on the left hand side you see the red boxes and the blanks. You can either pause it and do it now on your own, or you can listen to the answers. So our focus is most definitely question 3 on paper 1, and these 3 boxes underneath determine your paragraph focus. So we're going to have 3 smaller paragraphs, and they're centered on the first paragraph, which is why is the beginning so impactful to us? Does that change in the middle? And then how do they end it? And then this do next table focuses on trying to match up some new language. So all of the language on the left hand side, all of these words from pivotal moment to focus or zoom, they are key, really key phrases to use in your sentence stems for this question. You don't need to use them all. If you use them all, every time you use them, it is pointing your examiner to the right structural content that's required for this question. So match these up. They're not in the right order. Okay, and the answers there. So a pivotal moment is there a really tense moment? Is there a moment that has a main shift of action? Foreshadowing, is something bad on the way, and can you tell? The time shift or change, is it in chronological order? And how does time pass? Does it circle back to the beginning? Does it have this cyclical narrative structure? Is it a flash forward? Is it a look back in time? So that's time shift or change. Dialogue, does anyone talk? That can be a pivotal moment as well. So when dialogue comes in, it might be because the pace is quickened, and in that talk, are they dominating that as well? Is it in the past or the present? Which is self-explanatory. Which tense is it in? And is it in that throughout? And then the focus or zoom. Now those last two words at the bottom there are really important, because it's just another word for shift, another word for pivotal moment. And I love the idea of a zoom. So who is the section fixed on? What is the camera viewing, getting us to view there? Is it the camera, if you could imagine that this is a film, is the camera panned out to a big setting describing what you can see, the American Midwest? Can you see everything? Or is it zoomed on a man's face, something really small and really intricate, as our focal point? Okay, so you should see this slide come up quite a few times because I want you to get used to the colours, I want you to get used to the wording. The blue boxes underneath give you critical language to use. So much like the first slide with pivotal moment to zoom and focus and shift, everything in the blue boxes there I've just added on more structural terminology. So the language that you're using is growing. So does the narrative progress? Is there a journey? Is there a relationship? Is this perspective outwards or inwards? Things that you wouldn't normally pick up on a language question, but things you must focus on a structure one. So like I say, this is the beginning, change and zoom one. What happens at the beginning? What is the focus? What is particularly impactful? Where does it change? How does it progress? Is there a pivotal moment, a shift or a drop in somewhere? And then right at the very end, what is the zoom? Is it wide? Do we see that American Midwest again? Or is it really narrow and is it focused on the cowboy? So hopefully you're starting to understand that there's a language to the structure question, and once you've just got maybe 5 sentence stems, 5 key words, your examiner will be very confident when marking your piece that you know that this is about how it is driven forward for us. Okay, so now I'm going to read you the whole extract from the paper 1 of the November 2019 GCSE. So this was used just last year in the November. So if you were in college and you were doing a November entry, then this is the paper you got. This is taken from the beginning of a novel by Graham Joyce. A young married couple, Zoe and Jake, are on a skiing holiday in the French Pyrenean Mountains. What you could do at this point is that I've put the link to the paper in the comments. You could print it out. You can attempt to do the paper yourself completely at home, or you can just print out this document and annotate it, or pause this, screenshot it, and then you've got the extract yourself. It was snowing again. Gentle, 6-pointed flakes from a picture book were settling on her jacket sleeve. The mountain air prickled with ice and the smell of pine resin. Several 100 metres below lay the dark outline of St Bernard-en-Haut, their Pyrenean resort village. Across to the west, the irregular peaks of the mountain range. Zoe pulled the air into her lungs, feeling the cracking cold of it before letting go. And when the mountains seemed to nod and sigh back at her, she almost thought she could die in that place, and happily. If there are a few moments in life that come as clear and as pure as ice, when the mountain breathed back at her, Zoe knew that she had trapped one such moment and that it could never be taken away. Everywhere was snow and silence. Snow and silence, the complete arrest of life, a rehearsal and a pre-echo of death. She pointed her skis down the hill. They looked like weird talons of brilliant red and gold in the powder snow as she waited, ready to swoop. I am alive. I am an eagle. The sun was up now. In a few minutes there would be more skiers to break the eerie morning spell. But right now they had the snow and the morning entirely to themselves. There was a whisper behind her. It was the effortless track of Jake's skis as he came over the ridge and caught up with her. This is perfection. You ready to go? She asked. Yep, let's do it. They'd got up early to beat the holiday-making hordes for this first run of the morning. Because this, the tranquility, the silence, the undisturbed snow and the feeling of proximity to an eagle's flight was what it was all about. Jake hit the west side of the steep but broad slope as she took the east, carving matching parallel tracks through the fresh snow. But at the edge of the slope, near the curtain of trees, she felt a small slab of snow slip from underneath her. It was like she'd been bucked, so she took the fall line to recover her balance. Before she'd dropped 300 metres, the whisper of her skis was displaced by a rumble. Zoe saw at the periphery of her vision that Jake had come to a halt by the side of the piste and was looking back up the slope. Irritated by the false start they'd made, she etched a few turns before skidding to a halt and turning to look back at her husband. The rumble became louder. There was a pillar of what looked like grey smoke unfurling in silky banners at the head of the slope, like the heraldry of armies. It was beautiful. It made her smile. Then her smile iced over. Jake was speeding right towards her. His face was rubberized and he mouthed something as he flew at her. Get to the side, to the side! She knew now that it was an avalanche. Jake slowed, batting at her with his ski pole. Get into the trees, hang on to a tree! The rumbling had become a roaring in her ears, drowning Jake's words. She pushed herself down the fall line, scrambling for traction, trying to accelerate away from the roaring cloud breaking behind her like a tsunami at sea. Jagged black cracks appeared in the snow in front of her. She angled her skis toward the side of the slope, heading for the trees, but it was too late. She saw Jake's black suit go bundling past her as he was turned by the great mass of smoke and snow. Then she too was punched off her feet and carried through the air, twisting, spinning, turning in the whiteout. She remembered something about spreading her arms around her head. For a few moments, it was like being agitated inside a washing machine, turned head over heels a few times, until at last she was dumped heavily in a rib-cracking fall. Then there came a chattering noise, like the amplified jaws of a million termites chewing on wood. The noise itself filled her ears and muffled everything. And then there was silence, and the total whiteness faded to grey, and then to black. So now I've included this much larger sheet that gives you a lot more structural subject terminology, techniques, how you might explain these ideas in the extract. Just a really good page for you to print out for your revision. Obviously you've only got 10 minutes, maximum 12 minutes to do this 8-mark question, so I wouldn't expect all of these to be used at all. A handful of these would be good enough, and making sure that they are relevant to the extract. So if there is a resolution, an answer to the conflict, then use it. If you think your narrator is unreliable, then choose that. If there is no cyclical structure, if it doesn't start or has any hint of the beginning and the ending being as one, then don't use it. So print this out, screenshot it, print it. I will leave the PowerPoint also in the comments in the descriptive bit, because this is a great sheet to use. So what we're going to do now is work really slowly through 3 potential boxes to answer this structure question. And you can, on your own for 10 minutes, annotate what you think I'm going to talk about. So the question is always the same. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? And they give you that sort of map. What the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes the focus as the source develops. So that's that word focus, or shift, or pivotal moment. And then very blasé at the end, the last bullet point, any other structural features that capture your interest. It will say something along those lines, but really we want to look at not just the ending, what does it zoom in on, or what does it look outwardly to? So when you're annotating the extract, look for those things. Can you find 3 areas that you could talk about? And I'm going to show you an example of what my opening response would be in a minute. So I've put this slide back on again. This is the structure that we're looking for. It's the beginning change zoom. There's some terminology just to make it a little bit more simple. Do remember, I do not want you annotating any metaphor. There's metaphors in there, clear and as pure as ice. We're not interested that it's a simile. We're interested on the perspective of the character. So let's have a look at what that means. Okay, so around lines sort of 1 to 19 even, I would class that area as the beginning. You might just want to solely focus on the opening. I've captured it all within this paragraph. So let's see if your annotations match up to what my opening paragraph looks like. It should focus on the beginning for a start. It should focus on including a quotation or two, and then what that means for us as a reader. So let's have a read. The beginning focuses on a wide area that sets the scene and foreshadows the eventual turmoil for the young couple. Zoe's state of mind is reflected in the panorama of the mountains. The clear and pure as ice reflects Zoe's naive thoughts as she watches the place around her. We are given a little insight into her mindset, one that is happy, naive, and potentially lacks the understanding of the danger she could be in. So I've got a quotation. It's all structural language. It talks about the beginning and what the focus is, and what we are given. We're given this a little bit of insight. The opening is the scene is set, isn't it? We're given not just the pine resin, we've got the village, we've got the snow, we've got the mountain range. What you could further go into this bit as well, and one of my students has done this brilliantly, is something that I hadn't picked up on the first reading of it. If you can have a look at line 8, you would see line 7 and 8, and when the mountain seemed to nod and sigh back at her, she almost thought she could die in that place and happily. Now hopefully you know that I'm going to say that is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a structural technique. It is going to, it shadows, it gives you a hint of what is to come in the rest of the piece. And that is that she dies or is potentially dead by the end of the extract. And it's because of what she's looking at. That's also further hinted in the 3rd paragraph. Everywhere was snow and silence, the complete arrest of life, a rehearsal and a pre-echo of death. So because it's so quiet, the foreshadowing there is that it's quiet when she's in the whiteout. At the very end, when everything turns to black, she's heard loads and loads of noises in between the rest of the story and the end. There's lots and lots of noises that pull the tension out. But the pre-echo of death is that it's silent at this point and it is silent at the end as well. So that's sort of cyclical, isn't it? Which is structural as well. So that's something that you could focus on in your beginning paragraph as well. And now we go on to the second of our 3 paragraphs. I've put 2 quotations in here. I've definitely commented on what the effect of the structural devices are. So let's have a read. See if your annotations changed when you got to around line 39. Interestingly, the foreshadowing of the pre-echo of death begins its course around line 39. The writer gives us a climactic moment of change when the short sentence, "then her smile iced over," is provided. The narrative progresses much quicker with short paragraphs and a little dialogue to create pace and tension. The effect being that we are on the journey of racing down a mountain with both Jake and especially Zoe. So in this one, I've got those two quotations, one from the foreshadowing moment at the beginning, and then how that develops from the line, then her smile iced over. You don't have to choose that one. You might focus on the dialogue. You might focus on the fact it takes until line 42 for Zoe to know. She knew now that it was an avalanche. And what's interesting is that in the couple of paragraphs before that, the noises make her smile, which is something that we're going to talk about in question 4, to what extent. What's interesting here is that I've used what a lot of students do, that the writing creates pace and tension, which is absolutely right, but then you must include the following sentence after it. Why is it important to create pace and tension in a short story that's about an avalanche? Well, be specific. The effect of it is that we are on that journey with them. We have no idea whether they're going to live or die. And the reason that there's short dialogue and there's reason that there's shorter paragraphs is because we're on that journey with them, that it's intense, it's climactic, it makes us read faster, and it's all structural intent. Okay. And then finally, have a look if my last paragraph gives some of the ideas that your annotation did as well. Now, we've done this quite slowly and with great detail. I'm going to show you the indicative content of where the examiner expects you to be. This would be full marks and is quite detailed. So have a look if the green section uses structural terminology, uses quotation, and then tells us why it uses that as well. Finally, the writer uses a cyclical structure to mirror the silence of the beginning. After the sensory pace and development of the shift in the middle, the writer zooms in on Zoe's position. The final long sentence, the use of the repeated and, gives a structure that echoes Zoe's last movements. The noise itself muffled her ears, and then there was silence, and the total whiteness, and then to black. The extract finishes with stillness in contrast to the rapid momentum previously. So lots of structural terminology, and I picked up on that last long sentence there. The repetition of that connective and adds on to the piling of snow, doesn't it? Now, for me, obviously, I've looked at this extract a lot. I've taught it, so I do find structure comes quite easy once you have done it a few times. So what you could do now is have a look at the last 3 slides, those 3 arrows, beginning, change, and then what the zoom is at the end. Maybe write out my example or try it yourself using this indicative content that I'm going to show you on the next slide. So in order to get 7 to 8 marks, you have to be perceptive. You can't just do a bog standard, this is the beginning, here's a quotation, this is the middle, here's a quotation, and here's the end, because that's going to scrape you a grade 4. So you might as well have 5 pieces of subject terminology just for structural writing, and have a look at how the examiner shows you how it could look. Now, this isn't the amount of content that they expect you to do, but it's a very high level response. So let's see. The beginning presents Zoe's state of mind, at one with the mountain and its purity, serenity and stillness, and the tone is reflective and unhurried. This is reinforced when a short dialogue introduces Jake, and they both enjoy the tranquility, the silence, the undisturbed snow. At this point, they naively feel a bond with the mountain, which appears harmless. However, and this is the moment where it turns into that second paragraph area, the tone and mood soon change as they start to ski. Jake hits the west side and Zoe is carving matching parallel tracks on the east, so that we are taken fast-paced through the story and down the mountain. The narrative then stops abruptly as the skiers stop, concerned about a rumbling noise and what looked like grey smoke unfurling. They and we soon realise it was an avalanche, and at this point, although Zoe remains static, Jake is frantic, and the text rapidly builds momentum until it reaches a climax. In the final line, when Zoe blacks out, we are reminded of the silence at the beginning, but now the mountain has betrayed them, and it is the silence of disaster. Okay, so have a look if that's something that you could do. If you want to replicate it, please do. I like how they embed the quotations. Your examiner, when you're looking at perceptive and your level 4s here, you want to embed them and not put this quotation is represented or a quotation to show this is, because it's really waffly. We don't need that extra wording in a question that's going to take you 10 minutes to do. Okay, so that's a 25-minute lesson on one extract for an 8-mark question based on a GCSE paper. Really slow teaching through that. Please look through it before you go on to the next bit. So I'm not going to do any talking now. It's over to you. I'm just going to give you an introduction to each slide and then pause it at each slide and do the tasks given. There's also an at-home task section at the end that I'd like you to focus on. Any comments, please leave them in the comments section of this video with any questions that you might have or queries. If you're struggling, I can do shorter, just quick fire lessons on certain areas of the structure question. So, over to you. Over to you. This is another extract now, slightly harder I would say than the Zoe Avalanche one. Read it, annotate it for the beginning focus, the where does it change, or is there a pivotal moment that's quite intense, and then what does it zoom on at the end. So that's your task here. And then I thought I would be very kind to you, and I've given you some very basic sentence stems to get you into the 3-paragraph writing. Do go back to the slide that I told you to print out that has all the subject terminology on it that will strengthen your writing here. So here's the space for you to write out the response to the whispers question. Try and time yourself, 10 minutes. Here's just another resource that is the same as the one previously. I've just boxed it differently. Same thing. Use it as you wish. And again here you've got the beginning change zoom and you've got some subject terminology. Have you started to use that? So have you done 3 paragraphs? Are we talking about narrative progression? Is it cyclical? What's the outward focus or the inward focus? What's referred to? And what does it let the reader do? And after you've done that, this is our last structural test. So I've actually put the information for you on each of the top boxes. Read the paragraph. I've given you the language at the bottom, and I've actually given you what the focus is. So for example, on this one, once you read it, you'll find out that there's a wide focus of New York City. Sets the scene. There's a first person narrator who we're unsure about, don't know if they're reliable or not, and it's a zoomed out focus. So here could be the point where you do some reading and then write it up yourself. Same with the second paragraph. I've given you the middle. Tell me what changes. In this box at the top, I've actually given you the answers. Read it, see if you can find it. I'm trying to help you slowly through the structure question. So write it up. And then finally, what does it zoom in on at the end? What's the focus? Here's an example of how you might write it up in note form. A different way of doing it. You've got the flow chart, you've got the boxes, you've got the sentence stems, and now you've got a table. You just need to get used to getting this done really quickly. So go back through this again and again until you feel confident with it. And that's it from me. So what I would like you to do, any fiction that you've got at home or anything that you subscribe to online, little short stories, extracts, start looking at how they open. What's the opening like and why that's important? Is it a wide focus? Is it really narrow? Does it give you dialogue straight away? If it does, then that's really interesting because we don't have the scene set for us, which is incredibly mysterious. And then write down 3 sentence stems that support each area. Ask yourself, why does the writer do that at the beginning, at the change of focus, and then towards the end of the chapter perhaps. So do some fiction reading, enjoy yourself. I hope this lesson has been valuable, and don't forget to subscribe.